Facebook. It's Wes Hagen, and you are here at the right time and the right place to do a little day drinking with me. So looking forward to it. Got a little tobala here, a little some beautiful mezcal that I'm going to be warming up my pipes. So thank you everybody for coming in today. We got a great show. We're going to kind of have kind of a more kind of mellow hangout. We're going to I've got some questions that were sent in through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then we are going to take any questions. Hey, what's up, Don? Take any questions as they come. Of course, bring our Instagram friends in at 5 o'clock, hang out for a little bit. It's probably going to be about a half an hour today. As long as people have questions, I will not shut the hell up. So, Dawn, if you have any pressing questions that you would like to add to the agenda, anything about wine, spirits, dogs, no, anything you like. We talk about anything today. I just want to have a drink with everybody and just kind of hang out today. So, seems like a perfect thing to do on a Monday. So many Mondays have just been like turning and flying by. And we're starting to see a little bit of different, I don't know if anyone else is noticing. Oh, cool. I don't know if anyone else has been noticing this in their neighborhood, but I'm definitely starting to see my neighborhood start to act a little bit more normal. Not seeing quite as many full families walking around, getting exercise. Not seeing so many cars parked in the neighborhood, which probably means that folks are maybe starting to get back to work. So, hey, Phil, it's good to see you. I want to send you, my plan is to finish watching the Noodle movie, which I'm about 45 minutes in. I had to stop because I had to make dinner, but so far I'm just loving it. It reminds me a lot of Jiro, Dreams of Sushi, and Phil sent me a beautiful movie, a Japanese movie about noodle culture. And as you know, I am a huge fan. Oh, what's up, Josh? Michelle's in the house. Michelle, I've got your questions all written down here. We're going to be talking about cellar temps. We're going to be talking about, basically, I've done a little bit of research today to just expand my knowledge about what I already understand about how wine ages. We're going to talk a little bit today about temperature and how it affects the chemical aging of wine, because it certainly does. So that'll definitely be one that we're doing. So if anybody, as you guys come in, Josh, Phil, Dawn, Michelle, anybody else, as you guys are watching, if anything comes to your mind as far as what you'd like to talk about today or anything else, what you're drinking, what's going on with you, we've definitely got about 11 minutes to kill, and I really appreciate you guys always coming on early and keeping me company. Otherwise, I wouldn't even log in until 5 o'clock. So one of my favorite parts of the day is before I actually go on. Although this does become part of the official show as it exists. We're really looking forward to it. I got to start counting the shows because I think we're probably going to be coming up on 100th show sometime soon, which is really freaking crazy. But something that I want to, I don't know what we'll do, but I might have already missed it. I doubt it. I think we're probably up in the 80s or something. But when we do get up to that 100th show, we should do something special, and we should figure out something amazing to give away as a prize or something. Probably will have to be going to, the folks that are on right now, basically saying thank you guys so much for keeping me company from 4:45 to 5 o'clock 3 days a week. So we really appreciate that. Another little heat wave is expected to kind of fly in tomorrow. Today we were kind of expecting high 60s, low 70s. We got up to about 80, which was surprising. Came down rather quick, and it's not only going to be 52 degrees tonight, but tomorrow we're supposed to get up to 90 degrees, which is, if we actually do hit the big 90, we will have had a hotter day than we had all last July or August. So far, we've had a fairly warm spring out here in the Santa Maria Valley. Santa Barbara County wines are starting to see vineyards and canopies that are almost fully mature. Normally, we wouldn't see that probably till mid to late June. We're already seeing a lot of vineyards already through flowering and starting to see some fruit set. Haven't seen any bunch closure, which is where the berries go from tiny and like pea-sized to start expanding until the cluster is fully realized as far as size. This is the moment that we have to be incredibly careful with our watering. And why? Watering is really incredibly important in a vineyard between a bloom and bunch closure, because that is the moment that you can impact and manipulate berry size. Now, if you're a farmer, you want weight, because in general, you're going to be selling your grapes by weight. Cheers, everybody. But here's the thing. What the farmer wants, money for pounds of fruit, is exactly antithetical to what the winemaker wants, which is small berries, thick skin, minimal juice. So the berries aren't quite as plump and the clusters aren't as weighty. So, the farmer would love to get 2 clusters per pound, but the winemaker wants 7 clusters per pound. So, there's various things, like I understand that clusters in the Santa Rita Hills can be 25, 30 grams per cluster, which a gram is like the weight of a paperclip, while clusters of Pinot Noir in some parts of central Otago, New Zealand can weigh up to 100 to 125 grams. How in the world can those clusters be 5 times larger? It's all about terroir. It's all about the weather. It's all about the soil. It's all about how everything sort of lines up through the year. It matters the clone you're using. If you're using Pomard 4 clone of Pinot Noir, it's going to have larger clusters than if you're using a Dijon clone like 113, 114, 115, 667, 777, 828. Those clusters tend to be very tight. The clusters tend to be very small. Berries tend to be a little smaller, and your cluster weight's going to be smaller. We always did notice we would normally get 6 to 7 clusters per pound in our Dijon clones in Santa Rita Hills at Clos Pepe. But when we moved to the Dijon clones, sometimes we would find more like 4 to 5 clusters per pound. In some years, 3.5 to 4. So certainly the cluster architecture and the way a cluster looks as you take it out in the vineyard has a massive influence. In fact, I'm not saying the way that the fruit comes out of the field dictates the quality of the wine, but it dictates the potential quality of the wine. You can do a lot of, you can play around and, go bells and whistles and super craftsman artisan on moderately meh grapes and make a good drinkable wine because we have the technology for that. If it's not fruity enough, we have something to add. If it doesn't have acid, we have stuff to add. If it doesn't have enough, if it doesn't have enough mouthfeel or oak, we can always play with things. But as far as making a fine wine, and a wine that really represents the time and the place where it's grown, when you pull the trigger and pull those grapes out of the field, I really and honestly believe that is the moment that you have locked in the wine's potential quality. The frame of the wine, everything within the frame, well, you can play around with. Stem inclusion, different yeast, temperature, the vessel that you're using. All of these things have a great influence on the way that and the way wine's made. But one reason I think California does have a reputation for probably the most consistent wine in the world is the sunshine. I mean, sunshine is our currency. So how lucky are we that we live in a place where we don't have to really worry too much about here comes the rain, here comes the hail, here comes some serious problems with weather. Our ground shakes a little bit, and I'll tell you what, this tectonic instability between the Pacific plate and the North American plate, and originally there's another plate that got subducted, the Noroland? Anyways, I'll look it up. But as the Pacific plate and the North American plate continue to basically undergo one of the most violent tectonic dances in the history of this beautiful, wonderful, and violently created tectonic planet, that is what makes Santa Barbara wine so special. That's what helps those, basically the situation and how the water, Pacific Ocean moves, where we get our cold water, how we maintain some of the coldest water on the coast. That cold water churning up is obviously going to have a massive influence in absorbing the heat inland. So the closer we are to the Pacific Ocean, the more of that effect we're going to get, that diurnal effect of fog and wind, and the fog, sort of fighting the sun. And like I said, and you've probably heard me say this before, but on a warm summer day here in the Santa Maria Valley, you can literally watch the Pacific Ocean and summer fight right over our head. Fog goes in, fog goes out. Fog comes in, starts burning off. Oh, it comes in a little bit more, then it burns off a little bit more. Then we'll maybe get 4 or 5 hours of sunlight. Then we get the wind, and then the fog rolls back in, rinse, repeat. In a perfect world, that pattern not only is June gloom, but we also sort of have a gray July. And I don't mind at all if it persists into August. In fact, there's been years, like I remember maybe 2006 being a specific one, and maybe 2008 being another, where we honestly and seriously had a fair, situation where we never really got a proper summer, that we kind of stayed in that June gloom pattern, which is the best because I used to pick fruit in the day. Now I'm very, very excited about night harvest. So you don't have to sweat, you don't have to get, sunburned, you don't have to bring in hot fruit. Go out there, put a mining light on, put some lighting bars on the tractor, bring out some generators and some lights, whatever it takes. Get out there and pick fruit. The pickers like it more. You know, the vineyard manager, I love it. You know, I don't miss losing 2.5 months of regular sleep. There is a potential that changing your entire sleep pattern to going nocturnal probably is not very good for the human body, and I feel that. My sleep patterns were pretty much wrecked for almost 5 years, and I'm just starting to get back to a sense of normalcy. But hey, we want to give up everything we need to make sure that we make delicious wine, right? You know, body's not all that important. All right, and Mr. Phil is enjoying a 2017 cab. Ballard Lane, Central Coast, 17. So the 17 vintage, I'd say, was pretty classic, but hot. I would say any cool climate wine, Santa Maria, Santa Rita Hills, it was a good vintage, not a great vintage. I think a lot of the 17s are drinking incredibly well now because they're a little earthy and they're losing a little of their fruit earlier because I think it was a hotter year that left us with a little bit less than pure cool climate character in these wines. But in Cabernet, that the Central Coast, even though it's Central Coast appellated, Phil, that 17 Ballard Lane Cab is almost 100% French Camp, Paso Robles Highlands District. And even though we had hotter temperatures down here, and we had one of the hottest, I think the fastest harvest as far as how fast fruit got ripe and was harvested in Santa Barbara County. I think Paso had a warm year, but not an extraordinarily hot year because they are always hot. We suffer more when we get a high pressure situation. They're already 100 degrees. So we're not used to 90. We're not even used to 80. So when we hit 80, we get hot. And when we hit 90, we're like, what the heck? And when we hit 100, we melt. So, you know, Paso, just like turn on the AC, everything's cool. Santa Maria, Santa Rita Hills, Lompoc, we don't really believe in air conditioning. We open up our house at night, get it down into the low 60s, high 50s, shut it back up. Hope we can get through the day without the house getting hotter than mid 70s. So there we go. It is 4:59. I'm just going to go ahead and Michelle will insist you see the special features. Oh, Tampopo. Yes, that's the one. That is the movie. So thoroughly enjoying it thus far. My wife has a little bit of a difficult time reading subtitles. Thank you. So as a result, I'm going through it. And then, when she's in a good mood and she doesn't have a migraine, I've been reading the subtitles to, and she's been loving it. So we'll get to it and finish it very quickly. And I will watch the special features. All right. But it is, all right. Well, it's 5:00, which means it's Monday. And what is it? It is the 8th of June. We've made it this far, so there's no reason we can't even go further. So welcome again. My name is Wes Hagen, and I am the winemaker and brand ambassador for the Miller Family Wine Company and the J. Wilkes wine specifically. And now we've been doing this. I think I just was talking maybe 80 some shows and just loving it. I feel better and more confident with every show I do. So tonight we're having sort of a cool sort of informal Q&A session to learn as much or as little as you want about wine. I want you guys to be drinking. I want you guys to be having fun. I want you guys to be asking questions. Be as integrated and involved as you possibly can. As always here, if you have a question, please ask it. Unless you, I'm likely to ask, if I recognize you, I'll call out your name if I don't. If you don't want your name mentioned, you can always say that in the question, but I've got a couple questions to start us, and I think they're really good questions. So, let's kind of like jump in and talk a little bit about what's going on, in wine and what questions you guys might have to answer. So, as soon as I go through, these two questions, that's actually kind of like it's kind of two and a half questions. I'll certainly go back and take a look to see if anyone else has posted a question, posited a question. And of course, as always, if you're watching this and it's not live, you're more than welcome to put questions in the comments. And if for some reason I don't answer them, just ping me and I'll jump in and answer them. I try to go through and answer and reply to all of your comments each morning when I wake up while the coffee is starting to kick in. So let's all have a nice big sip. I'm having a little bit of mezcal at the beginning of today's show, so you know that I will be glib and I will be relaxed. Mezcal has kind of become my new favorite white spirit. It used to be silver tequila, but man, can Mezcal do a lot more than tequila. So expressive and just so rare. It's just absolutely, it's complex. It's absolutely wonderful. So all the folks that are coming in, we got about 6 or 7 people coming in on Instagram. Thank you so much for Tim and Arped Ved and Ms. Toronto, or CF Toronto, I shouldn't just assume. And why by the numbers? There we go. We had a great conversation about wine scoring in the 100-point scale. Oh, I should also mention a couple things. One, little housekeeping. One, if you weren't here on Friday, I had a great conversation with Master Sommelier Wilkes Costello. We had a 1-hour conversation about how to take a tasting note. Should we take tasting notes? What are they good for? And what's the difference between the way I would take a tasting note as a winemaker? Basically, the take-home message is to remind myself of what I did to a wine and how it tastes. So it's a little more definitive. And then for a master sommelier, they get paid to take wine tasting notes. The cool thing I think that Will was talking about, and you should really go back and watch this because we've reposted the entire show because part of it was cut off on Facebook Live. But you can go to Facebook Live, either the J. Wilkes Wine Santa Barbara or I think that's the one, or our YouTube channel for J. Wilkes Wines or the Miller Family Wine Company, and get to see that entire hour of me talking to Master Sommelier Will Costello about tasting notes. Really, really good stuff. All right, let's jump into Karen, lovely to have you guys here. Stoked to have everybody here. I am watching for questions, so I will try to take notes on those, and I will try to make sure. All right, so I've got a couple other questions coming in too. All right, Jim, yes, sir, you do need to find. Don Ward's having a Dumal, Russian River Pinot Noir, one of the first Pinot Noirs that ever really turned me on to the potential quality of California Pinot Noir. I think Dumal does an incredible job. No, you don't have to give any time before drinking. Down the hatch. And then I got a question from Josh Niemeyer. And we've got a little bit of a question. In fact, I'll handle Phil's question because we were already talking about the Ballard Lane Cabernet Sauvignon 2017 and the year 2017, which was a warm year, generous year, and probably a better year, I would say, in Paso than in Santa Barbara County. Santa Barbara County, the wines were a little ripe, a little generous, not quite my style, a little lower in acid, a little higher in extract and strawberry fruit. Good wines, really solid vintage. I mean, Santa Barbara always produces good wines, but Paso, they're used to that heat. That heat may have been, 10% over normal, but our heat back in 17 was the warmest year I think we've ever had on record for the production of wine. Now that tastes better. All right, there's some very interesting tobacco, cedar, and fennel notes in the Ballard Lane 2017 Central Coast Cabernet Sauvignon. By the way, even though it says Central Coast, I do believe that wine could have been labeled as Paso Robles or even as Paso Robles Highlands District, because I think almost 100% of that wine comes out of our French Camp vineyard. Any reason why? Well, certainly tobacco, cedar, and fennel. When I think about tobacco and cedar in Cabernet Sauvignon, I think of it as sort of a amalgam of varietal characteristic and oak treatment. So certainly, normally, I think you would find most winemakers and most wine educators would probably suggest that the flavors of tobacco and cedar would be oak driven. So are they actually in the wine, or are they actually absorbed by a toasted French or American oak barrel or Eastern European, an oak barrel during the aging of the wine? And the answer is mostly barrel, but not quite totally. Because Cabernet is also known as Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon, the Sauvignon means savage, animal, like crazy, like it has a sense of wildness to it, would be a good way of describing how it goes. So the wildness is going to lend itself to giving wild and intense characters as they're expressed through the oak. So you might not get as much, fennel can also be from a slightly warm vintage, where the sauvage character, which you can, it might have a little herbaceousness, it might have a little vegetative quality, and fennel, to me, has both. It's savory, it's herbaceous, and it might even be a little vegetal. That fennel character, good palate, by the way, because you're picking up something that really is on the edge of perception. And picking that up at edge of perception, for my best guess, I would say that the tobacco and a little bit of your cedar. Cigar box, I think, would be a nice way of using a term that would combine both. Would probably be a combination of a warm vintage, not allowing the wine to have a slow, long, extended hang time to remove all of the vegetal and herbaceous character. But also, it's funny because many of these characters in a wine in a Cabernet Franc from Saumur or anywhere in the Loire Valley where Cabernet Sauvignon or Cabernet Franc is grown might have a very strong herbaceous character that will be recognized as a very important part of that wine. The exact same aromas in a California wine are generally considered to be false. But at the Miller Family Wine Company, we just don't let these grapes get hyper ripe. We like to make honest wines that we don't water down, that come in between 13 and 14% alcohol for people who love to eat and drink a wine that's balanced and that shows the place where it's grown, instead of a stylistic affectation that becomes us getting the fruit like a potential of 19% alcohol and then watering it back down to 14 or 15, because that's kind of the way traditionally that you get the high scoring wines is high extract, fairly high alcohol with a lot of punch, a lot of jamminess. So you're not going to really get that. If we had allowed those grapes to get 26, 27 bricks and watered it back down, Phil, that wine would have been significantly different. You wouldn't have got the cedar. You wouldn't have got the tobacco, maybe a little bit of the cigar box over the top of all that overripe fruit. But the reason you're smelling that, two reasons I would say. One is the vintage, a little warmer, a little shorter. So you're not going to get as much completeness of loss of the flavors that you perceive. And the oak in the wine is going to have a little bit of influence as well. Hot climate, a little bit of oak, also just the restraint that we had in the picking of that wine. I hope that helped. You're like, that was a long answer. I don't know if I want to ask any more questions. All right, so what we'll do is we'll jump into, I've got 4 or 5 different questions in various places. You're reporting live from the Lincoln Memorial with a wine cup in your hand. Oh, please give a nod to good old Abe. Not only was he a heck of a president and a heck of a brave man, he was the first president with a beard, I think. Is that right? First president with a beard? I think he was. He was also an amazing champion wrestler. Dude, you would not want to mess. Okay, I was about to say something about, the physical prowess of the current president. But in the 1800s and the 1850s and 60s, you would not have wanted to challenge Abe Lincoln. First of all, he was frickin' huge. And second of all, he was a great wrestler. 2 things I would mention. And thank you so much, Karen, for being in our nation's capital, showing the world that flourishing means giving everyone a fair shot. So appreciate that. And I hope whatever wine's in your glass, I wish I could just give you a case of wine right now, like fax you a case of wine so you can just start passing around some wine to all the fine folks that are surrounding you. So awesome. Excited to have you there. That's really, really cool. All right. So the first question that I was asked was Michelle Shin's question, and she wanted to know a little bit about cellaring temperatures and protocol. What happens to wine? She had an issue where some wine that she ordered showed up, and it was a hot day. So what do? Do you just say, well, first of all, number one, in wine shipping, most wine shippers now have the capacity to actually put cooling packs within your stuff or dry ice. So when your wine arrives, here's what I do. When I used to send wine out at Clos Pepe, and I don't do the shipping here anymore, but we do have the ability, I think for $3.95 added, we put a bunch of ice packs in your wine, and it's good for like 2 or 3 days. But what I used to do is I just wouldn't ship between April and October. But if you do ship, you really got to be careful. So what I would do, even because it's going to be hot somewhere in the United States, and we were shipping to most states. So what I would do is I would get those cool little squares, individually wrapped squares of Ghirardelli 70% cacao chocolate. And I would put one in, and on the tasting notes, we would put the chocolate right on top with a little note pointing to the chocolate that says, when your wine arrives, take this chocolate out, and if it's melted, call us. And if the chocolate is solid, you're good. That would keep it, knowing that the temperature probably never went over 80, 85. I've had wines that have suffered in serious heat, even pushed corks that were perfectly sound. Now, if you were going to drink a wine that or you suspect has some heat damage, The key would be to drink it as soon as possible, because what's going to probably happen is it's going to prematurely oxidize after it has pushed through the cork. There's some problem with the cork, or it's leaking. That leaking is going to allow oxygen back to enter into the wine, and you're going to have an oxidative problem, and you're going to end up getting sherrified, if not vinegary wine. So say you just got your box, you think it's too hot. The first thing I do is start cutting capsules. So I'll cut a capsule and then I'll look, did the wine leak? Did the capsule or did the cork push? If the cork did not push and the cork did not leak, my feeling is you have a pretty good chance of having a sound bottle of wine. Now, if it got hot for one day or one afternoon or just sitting on your porch, you're probably much better off than if it's been sitting there cooking for days or weeks or months. Improperly cellared wine will go bad. So what is properly cellared wine? 55 to 65 degrees on the bottle being sideways. That's a sideways bottle. And why a sideways bottle? Keep the cork wet. As long as the cork is wet, it stays moist, and it stays turgid, and it doesn't dry out and basically allow oxygen to come into the bottle. So you want your wine 55 to 65 degrees, bottle on the side, cork wet at 75 to 85% humidity. That's a lot of work. What do I do with my wines? I do not have a wine cellar. I do not have temperature control in my house. So I keep my cellared wines in the most interior part of my house, in an empty closet, and basically 2 levels of stacked wine at the very bottom. So you want to keep your wine low. You want to keep your wine in the middle of the house, or on what I guess it would be the northwest side of your house, probably. The coolest area of your house is the most important thing. And if you, like I know some people that don't have any ability to have a cellar, but they keep their house at 69 to 72 degrees with climate control, you can put the wines on the bottom of your closet, and your wines will probably be good for 5 years. Here's the deal, though. Is it more important to have the wine at the same temperature all the time, or is it more important to not let your wines go to temperature extremes? It's a really good question. Temperature extremes can ruin the wine all at once, but vacillating cellar temperature can cause wines to age very not sequentially. The wines will age in various and sort of confounding ways. If you can keep your cellar at 67 degrees, or let me put it this way. If you had a choice to having your cellar 70 degrees, 365 days out of the year, 24 hours a day, and then you had another cellar that would go between 55 and 80, I would choose 72 all day long. What's too hot for wine? For long-term aging, I think over low 70s is a serious problem. In fact, I think I read a study that said wines age twice as fast for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit over 65 in your cellar. So if your wines are 65 in your cellar all the time, those wines might go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 100 years, depending on where they're from and their reputation and their provenance. If your wines are moving, kind of like all over the place, I think you're gonna have some issues with how those wines change. And then any other way that I can think of. Now, I would say that wines under screw cap are probably less likely to get heat damage as a result that they're just going to stay sealed no matter what, unless the top busts off a bottle, and then you'd have a serious problem. But in general, I would say 72 to 74 degrees is probably fine to keep wine settling for a year or two at the most. But I would say other than that, you're going to probably need to do that. All right. So that's a little bit about cellaring. And then I had another question here about carbonic maceration. So it's a very fancy term. So what does carbonic maceration mean? Carbonic maceration is a very specific fermentation technique that is mostly used for the production of Nouveau Beaujolais in the Beaujolais region from the Gamay grape. So here's what you do. You take a very specialized stainless steel tank and you basically fill it like 2/3 the way up with fresh clusters of Gamay or whatever red grape. Some people do this with Pinot Noir. I think they're insane. Anyways, what happens then is before the fermentation starts and starts making its own carbon dioxide, you actually inject CO2 into the tank, so the entire tank is blanketed with CO2. That means there's no oxygen ingress, and the CO2 actually manages to accentuate and to encourage a anaerobic primary fermentation within the berries of the grapes. So the juice within the berries begins to start to ferment until there's pressure, and then those grapes burst their skins. And at the same time, the weight is bursting the skins of the grapes underneath, which gets more yeast involved, which also adds a little bit of oxygen. No big deal. But then the carbon dioxide takes over. Now you have to be very careful because this is a closed system, and a tank that can't handle pressure could explode, and you could be in really bad shape. But that's carbonic maceration. So carbonic maceration, it's been proven to produce esters that are not normally produced in regularly fermented grapes. In red wine, you might get a little banana. You might get bubble gum. It's very common to smell sort of like a what I describe as a confectionery grape character, which would be sort of like eating grape cotton candy. Well, the wine's going to be dry because it can go to dry during this fermentation. The interesting thing is what we haven't been able to find out yet. Yes, it produces the banana. Yes, it produces the bubble gum. Yes, it produces the confectionery characters, the characters that we're so used to smelling in Nouveau Beaujolais. And interestingly, Nouveau Beaujolais and carbonically macerated wines are usually the only red wines in the world. Less than 0.1% of all red wines in the world are produced without going through malolactic fermentation. That malolactic fermentation is generally arrested in carbonic macerated wine. So no, because the wines are meant to be basically very commonly from harvest to bottle in Beaujolais, 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I mean, like a beer. A little longer than a beer. It's not quite a poem. It's not quite a short story. It's like sudden fiction. Boom, there you go. It's the equivalent of about a 400-word short story. So it's a very, very fast kind of moving process. But whatever those processes are that we know scientifically that are producing these odd, atypical esters in red wine, there's also something that we know about carbonically macerated wine. They don't age. They just don't. Show me an example. I find Nouveau Beaujolais in my cellar once in a while. They're a couple of years old, and they're always, I'm just too Presbyterian to throw them away. So I will, come from a very thrifty Scotch Presbyterian family. I'm not specifically religious. Probably can tell by the shirt. But it's really important to realize that if you buy a carbonically macerated wine, it is meant to be drunk like a double IPA or an IPA. It's not going to get much better. It's just... It's sort of like a wine that lives by its youth. And if it's not consumed in its youth, it's probably not going to be all that great. Awesome. All right. So, Josh, and I hope everything is well, Josh. Josh is a sheriff down in San Diego, and I know it's probably not easy to be a really, really good cop these days. But you are one, sir. And I know there's a lot of people around you that are that fine line between us and who knows what. So thank you for your service. I do appreciate you because I know you and I know you're a good man. Can I speak on wine's progression in the bottle after bottling and the funky states it can go through? Yeah. What's this stuff about bottle shock? Well, first of all, if you saw the movie, okay. It's good that they made a good movie. Because I think I like Bottle Shock better than Sideways. Sideways was just about men behaving badly with no comeuppance. And a really great sort of aside, a little soliloquy about Pinot Noir that for some reason made that movie about Pinot Noir and what they did to Merlot, but we won't talk about that. But when we're really, really talking about Bottle Shock, we're talking about something that really doesn't have a lot of literature and a lot of peer-reviewed scientific study to show what Bottle Shock is. What I know is when we blend the wine and it's still in the tank before bottling, the wine is expressive and beautiful and bright and primary and all the things that we want it to be. It's exactly the way we want it to be. We put it in the bottle. We always go home and open a bottle of everything and see kind of what stuff tastes like after that day of bottling. And it's great. Day of, it's great. In fact, I usually find usually between 4 days and a week after bottling, the wines are fine. Sometimes up to 10 days to 14 days. Then, for some reason, theoretically, if we believe in bottle shock, we can have a placebo effect by just thinking the wine is not drinking very well and it's going to improve. We have bad palate days and good palate days. But what I find is trying to describe the actual chemical and physical processes. This is something that's very difficult for a winemaker like me, that I do take bottle shock, and I'm gonna catch crap for this for the rest of my life. I do think of bottle shock as something that I believe a little bit on faith, because I don't really have the peer-reviewed double-blind scientific studies. I don't know how it'd be double-blind, but you know what I mean. I don't really have the scientific studies to show, hey, this is a real thing. But what I've found in my experience after 25 harvests of making wine, when you open a wine, before a couple months after it's been bottled, the wine just usually tends to be a little beat up. Let me give you the explanation that my guru Brian Babcock told me. He's like, I don't know if bottle shock is real, and this guy knows so much more about organic chemistry than I do. He's like, you can't really say if bottle shock is real, but we've all had this experience of tasting our wine after it's bottled and saying, why is it so dumb? Why is it not speaking, right? Why isn't it speaking like it spoke before it was in the bottle? He said to me, imagine, and again, this is a little, ascientific, non-scientific, not anti-scientific, because it's based on some amount of replicable observation. That our replicable observation is wine after 2 weeks to a month in bottle tastes half as expressive as it does before it was bottled or 3 to 4 months after. I like 6 months from bottling for release, but that's very difficult to do for a lot of people. So I would say on average, probably 2 months is probably considered, but we put everything after bottling into a one month QC hold, and then we go through and evaluate it and see where it is before we decide to send it to critics, send it to markets, and start selling it. So what is it? As Brian Babcock said, imagine being a wine, and you've lived your life as juice form, and then as wine form, and then you're in a barrel for maybe 10 months, 16 months, hanging out with 300 other bottles of wine, and then you are run through usually some type of filtration or fining, and then you're put into a tank. You've had some additives, maybe get stirred, all these things, and then you're with all your buddies. You're with hundreds of, thousands of your bottle buddies, right? And you are one large mass of wine. And then clunk, 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 clunk. You just start hearing this pump, and that tank starts going down. The wine goes, basically, through a restrictive hose, pumped through, beaten up through the hose, taken out, basically put into a machine that's going to basically fill the bottle, or blow the bottle out, fill the bottle, cork the bottle, and then the bottle gets picked up, thrown into a box. The box gets sealed, and then it gets stacked up on a pallet. So, I mean, you go from the freedom of a barrel, freedom of a tank, to being stuffed in a 750 milliliter bottle. There has got to be some physical and chemical changes that occur to a wine when it's stuffed in a bottle like that. We just don't understand specifically how that's working. So bottle shock is still a little bit of a mystery, and one of the few things left in the world that I guess I still have faith in. We'll see what happens. And I am noticing that my picture on Facebook has been telling me that it's having trouble playing my own video. So either Nick or Phil or Josh, if you could just let me know that you can still see me on Facebook, I'd really appreciate that. Cool. And then we've got a question here that I noticed last season, due to a very dry late summer, early fall, for the same pounds of grapes, there was much less juice. This is due to a greater skin to juice ratio. Much more well extracted. Yeah, you always want, as I said, deficit irrigation between flowering and bunch closure. Bunch closure is when those tiny little pea-sized grapes start getting larger and they start going into massive cell reproduction. And as those cells reproduce, the berries swell and they reach whatever size they are by virtue of how much water is available in the soil at that point. So deficit irrigation, stopping the irrigation and being gentle with the irrigation is certainly going to do a great job of increasing the color and intensity of the wine if that's what your aim is. And Jennifer, I'm stoked you're drinking some good. Oh, I'm out. So my goal tonight really was to finish this beautiful bottle of 2015 Bien Nacido Estate Pinot Noir. that I tasted with you guys on Friday. If you haven't seen the program, I thought it was really, really good. And this wine is nothing short of miraculous. I had nothing to do with making it. I have nothing to do with selling it. I'm part of the team. It's part of the same company. But man, if you haven't had a Biendecido estate wine and you like Burgundy, if you love Oregon, if you love a wine with a little bit of restraint, elegance, and massive amounts of complexity, certainly a big fan of this. All right, I'm working my way through Facebook, but I'll trade off. I'm seeing a question right here from Tim, guest. Why would a winery note that a wine that they're selling is oxidative? Never. Except me, because I'm a little too honest to for my own good. They probably wouldn't, Tim. And here's the idea is, I might have been a little bit misunderstood that in a sense that we were talking maybe about heat and oxidative sort of spoilage of a wine. Well, certainly I'm going to tell you to do everything you can to keep that from happening. And it's another reason why we bottle our wines with about 0.5 part per million dissolved oxygen. So our dissolved oxygen is really low in the wine, so that oxidative potential is not going to happen. Now, a sherry producer, for sure, some type of any oxidative style of wine, orange winemaking, those are going to be oxidative styles. And there are natural winemakers that appreciate an oxidative style. So I'm not really ever going to none of the Miller family wines I'm going to say are oxidative on purpose or even oxidative by mistake. We're incredibly careful with our chemistry. We're incredibly careful with our craftsmanship to make sure that all these wines, and I will put this out there. If you have some Miller family wines, whether they're Ballard Lane, J. Wilkes, Barrel Burner, or Smashberry, you will know, if you've been watching the show and sipping, that these wines are solid for 3 to 4 days on the counter. They're not, in fact, I'll go so far, and I'm being a little defensive because I'm scared that I made you think that we try to make our wines in an oxidative style, and we absolutely do not. We don't make carbonically macerated wines at Miller Family Wine Company yet. We don't make an oxidative style or a pet nat or anything like that yet. Nothing wrong with the style. If you love it, that's great. But we will always do everything we can to really, really try to minimize oxidative characters within our wine. Is it true that if you chill a red wine that you cannot allow it back to room temperature? Like if you forget a red wine in the fridge when you're putting a light chill on it? No, it's fine. One thing you'll notice is the colder a red wine gets, it's going to start throwing a lot of sediment. So you'll know that your red wine has been in the refrigerator a little bit too long because you're going to start getting kind of sparkly, sort of polymerized tannin chains at the bottom of your wine. It's going to look a little bit kind of like a sparkly, like, it's hard to say. Some people call them wine diamonds. I freaking hate that term because it makes it sound like we meant to do that. Leaving a red wine in a fridge will start polymerizing the tannins faster, and those polymerized tannins will start falling out in solution. You might get a little bit of sediment at the bottom of your bottle. There's no reason that if you're going to be drinking a bottle of red wine over 3 or 4 days, that you shouldn't put it in the fridge. And then, keep it in the fridge, and then before dinner, leave it out for an hour. So it hits the table at maybe 63, 64 degrees, and you can let it warm up to maybe 70, 75. So I don't find that to be, oh, good. Oh, thank you, Tim. Tim has made me feel a little bit better. He's talking about another winery I found. To me, that seems like a pretty weird flex to say, try our wines, they're oxidative. It's like, try our cola, it has no carbonation. A little problematic from my perspective. All right, so we've got, the fennel and licorice common flavor characteristic of the Coro Noir hybrid when they're young. Nick, I actually tasted that in your wine when I went back to your Noir blend. I did notice 3 days after I had opened it, it was not a week after it was still sound under my favorite little repour. These are these cool little devices that suck up oxygen in your bottle for about a month. They're meant for a single bottle throughout. You can put this in a bottle and drink it over like weeks. I cheat, and I'm sure once in a while the guy who invented these comes onto my show, so I have to be careful because he's helping sponsor the show. But I do normally just put the date that I opened on them, and I use them for a month, and I do change them from bottle to bottle. They are much less likely to work perfectly if you're using them from bottle to bottle. They're really meant for a single bottle. But I find that if I use them for 2 weeks from bottle to bottle, they certainly help keep those bottles fresh. Going back to the Corolla Noir, I did get a little bit of a hybrid character out of that wine after it'd been open for a few days. That beautiful baby fat and that beautiful richness and that beautiful primary character really kept it from showing much foxiness, much hybrid character at all. But once the wine had lost a little bit of its youth and baby fat and started to oxidize just a little bit, I started getting a little bit more of that hybrid character that I actually look for in a hybrid wine. So I found it was just a really, really well-made wine. So, and then Beverly asked, how long does a red wine last after it's open before it goes bad? It can be anything from it sucks the next day to, oh my gosh, this wine has been open for a week without any type of protection and it is totally sound and delicious. What really matters is pH. You want lowest pH possible. For a wine as it opens, I do believe that a high acid wine will last longer than a low acid wine when it's open. Balance is really important. If the alcohol is really high, as it starts to lose a little bit of its youthfulness, I think the alcohol will take over. So I would say the criteria for me for a red wine for aging, number one is provenance. Where is it from? Does the vineyard and the winemaker producer have a reputation for making wines that age incredibly long? And if the wine is known for being an ager, it'll last longer open. In fact, it might even give you a hint of where it's going in a few years. Can I make a statement like a red wine being open one day is like a red wine being in a cellar for 5 years? No, it doesn't work like that. Fast oxidation impacts the wine in a much, much different fashion than very, very slow oxidation within the hermetic seal of the bottle. Here's something that you probably don't know. Someone has probably gotten to you and made you believe that oxygen from the environment moves through the cork and into your wine. I will say that is patent BS. The gas exchange between the cork and the wine is real, but it can only happen with whatever gaseous environment exists between the pores of the oak. So whatever's happening in the molecular structure of the oak, is there oxygen in there? Is there carbon dioxide in there? Is there sulfur dioxide in there? Whatever gases exist within the molecular structure of the cork will transfer in the wine. Generally, I don't believe that a wine, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, or if the cork is faulty, you can start getting a little bit of ingress of outside environment into the wine, but I don't believe so. My personal feeling is that a cork is a hermetic seal in the sense that it keeps all the outside away from the inside, but the inside is inclusive of the molecular structure of the cork and the gases that exist within the cork. I hope that makes sense. I do use argon, and I pay a lot of frickin' money for it. So, inert gas, carbon dioxide is the worst gas you can use in the winery because it tends to absorb in the wine and make the wine tingly. A little bit sort of sparkling, or what would the French call it? A little crémant. And then you would have nitrogen gas, which is about the best you can do. Nitrogen is awesome. People love nitrogen. Then there's actually called a beverage mix of gas, which is a mix of nitrogen and argon, which is about 3/4 the price of argon. And then if you really want the absolute best gas with, absolutely no impact on the wine, it really is amazingly good, I think that would probably be argon. And then I got Tim asking, and then we'll move right back to, and wait, I'm going to just check to make sure that people can see me. Oh, good. I've got a couple, I'll go here and then we'll go back over. I got a great question here. Tim is asking, what are my feelings on whole cluster fermentation for Pinot Noir? I heard that some winemakers don't like it. Yes. Emile Peynaud, one of the greatest winemakers Burgundy's ever seen, spent his entire life railing against whole cluster fermentation. What the hell is whole cluster fermentation? Whole cluster fermentation just means that instead of separating the berries from the rachis, and the rachis just means the stem that the berries are on. So if you're sitting there eating grapes, you're holding the stem and pulling the grapes off the rachis, right? Okay, so the rachis is trash to me, and Emile Peynaud 100% would agree with me. So I don't grow stems. I grow grapes, and stems to me are trash, and I don't like the flavors that stems give to wine. What does stem inclusion do? If I'm arguing for stem inclusion, you're going to get more tannin, more mouthfeel, more complexity in a young wine. What's the problem? You're going to get herbaceousness. If you're not careful, your wine's going to smell like broccoli. You're going to lose, your pH is going to go up and your acid's going to go down. So you lose pH, you lose color. Your wine has a greater tendency to be turbid or cloudy, and your wine has a greater tendency to have higher pH, lower acid. And, you know, I'm just, again, if I, as a, you know, someone who managed a vineyard for 20 years, I just don't find stems represent terroir. And people are like, well, you just have to leave your stems in the sun for a little bit and then throw them in once they're linified. Okay, well, here's the problem with stem inclusion. I am the person they put on the panel to rip stem inclusion a new hole, because basically that's how I feel about it. I think I don't like. Now, I've had wines that have stem inclusion on the edge of perception, and I think they're fantastic. This wine has a little bit of stem inclusion. This 2015 Biennacido. But you know what? With the licorice and the strawberry and the raspberry and all of the earthiness and the soy sauce and all these wonderful savory aromas, the stem inclusion is at the edge of perception and just adds another layer of complexity that does not mess up, that does not hide the truer nature of this wine. And that's what I love about it. What does stem inclusion do? What else might it do? So you lose color, you lose pH. You get a lot of these herbaceous characters. Now, somebody will say, but oh man, when you allow a stem-included wine to age for 5 to 7 years and it integrates. Well, you know what? Once it integrates, I can't even tell it's there. You know, so you're right. Stem inclusion does integrate. I've had wines that are like drinking broccoli juice, and then 7 years later, it's like drinking Grand Cru Burgundy. So yes, it can change. Yes, but in a culture where 90% of wines are consumed within 48 hours, I like my Pinots to be juicy, bright, and expressive of the fruit, not necessarily an expression of my own affectation and my winemaking decisions. I want the wines to be pure, and I don't find the flavor of stem inclusion to be pure. All right. I hope. And then I had one here. Did I use the same grapes in making Pinot Noir as I did at Clos Pepe? Oh, it was my favorite wine. Yes. Well, all the wines I made at Clos Pepe, I still make at J. Wilkes. So Chardonnay and Pinot Noir is all I made. Now, I did make the Axis Mundi wines, where Grenache, which I make a rosé. I was making Mourvèdre rosé at Clos Pepe and Axis Mundi. I do make a Grenache rosé that has a little Syrah and a little Chardonnay in it. So there you go. I guess that has a little bit. But then I've got the stuff that I was never really ready to play with. I have the Pinot Blanc, which makes perfect sense because I've made Grenache Blanc and I've made stainless steel Chardonnay. So making aromatic white wine didn't really freak me out as much as some of the other grapes I was asked to make, like Zinfandel, like Cabernet Sauvignon, like Lagrein, like a blended Barbera. Well, fortunately, I just make all red wines like Pinot Noir. And if you can make Pinot Noir, you can generally make just about anything. So you'll notice that there is a sort of a skein within the J. Wilkes world of elegance, restraint, fruitiness, full-bodied. But also, if you're looking for the biggest, ripest, gnarliest wines, they're not mine. There's plenty of people you can go to that. The way I look at the wines here, especially at J. Wilkes, is that they're really built for people that collect, that are interested in the flavors that come out of a place and a time, and that's exactly what we do there. All right, let's go over to Facebook and see what's going on. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Yes, Ian McKenzie hit it on the dot. He gave it a much better definition than I do. Bottle shock is when the wine is experiencing separation anxiety. Yep. Just like a terrier when you go out to do your shopping. Jennifer Mackey, does bottle shock also refer to the shock the wine might have from traveling a long distance? We call that travel or travel shock. I don't know. Anyways, I've definitely experienced the fact that sometimes a wine that gets shipped somewhere does show a little bit of shockiness right as it arrives, but it recovers faster. So I would say the only difference and again, this is Wes talking with a science shirt on, a faith-based proposition. that in my experience, observing, but also something I can't prove scientifically, bottle shock after bottling might last a month and a half, maybe 2 months. The bottle shock that you get from travel would usually, I would say, show improvement within a week. Yeah, I don't know if travel shock's the right way. I know I've heard other people talk about this. Santa Barbara County limestone and Cote d'Or limestone. Well, first of all, there's really not much limestone in Santa Barbara County, Jim. If we're talking about limestone versus calcareous shale versus diatomaceous earth, we're basically talking about the same language. Why? I guess what we're really talking about is porous, high calcium marine deposits and or exchangeable calcium in a form that absorbs water when it's dry or when it's wet and gives off water when it's dry. So I would say the diatomaceous earth of Santa Rita Hills, the calcareous shale and the Monterey deposit that influences a lot of our vineyards at Bien Nacido. We do have limestone at Bien Nacido, so that's very, very unusual in Santa Maria Valley. So you can actually taste a little bit of the limestone influence in the estate wines because these are the best blocks of Pinot Noir that we have. So the most important thing with all of these soils, the Cote d'Or definitely follows the Kermigian deposit as well as the Jura Mountains, which are chock full of limestone in certain places. What does that limestone do? What does the calcareous shale do? What does the diatomaceous earth do? They all do the same thing. What do the old oyster beds in Chablis do? We're talking about exchangeable calcium, and the reason why exchangeable calcium is really important is because the grapevines feed upon that exchangeable calcium and use it to structure the skins. So a grapevine determines how thick the skins of their berries are going to be by virtue of how much exchangeable calcium is at root level. So the higher the calcium in the soil, whether it's calcareous shale, diatomaceous earth, whether it's limestone, whether it's some other form of marine deposit or non-marine deposit, that calcium is going to be incredibly important for the grapes to make their skins a little bit thicker. And as calcium increases, limestone from the Cote d'Or or diatomaceous earth from the Santa Rita Hills, calcareous shale here in Santa Maria Valley, as the berries' skins get thicker, the juice is reduced exponentially. So that's really, really important. Calcium is incredibly important. There's really only, I see personally, two precursors for minerality in any wine. One, there has to be a good acid, low pH. Have you ever had a flabby wine that was mineral? If you do, please tell me what it was, because I've asked that question for 25 years and never gotten a good answer. It seems like mineral wines have to have structure. They have to have pretty good pH. I would say at least 5 grams of titratable acidity and no higher than maybe 3.5 pH. That's me spitballing now. Yeah, so I would just say that in general, the most important thing is if you get at least 5,000 parts per million of exchangeable calcium in the soil by limestone, diatomaceous earth, calcareous shale, oyster beds, that's where you have the capacity to grow cool climate or continental fruit that really shows that amazing minerality. So one thing I would say from Santa Barbara and the Cote d'Or, in general, there's really nothing Cote d'Or like about Santa Barbara, except at Bien Nacido, there's a little limestone. But in general, the Cote d'Or is the Cote d'Or, Santa Barbara is Santa Barbara. And the next time a winemaker tells you, oh, this wine is so Burgundian, ask him where in Neuilly St. George it was grown, or where along RN74 the vineyard's grown, because Burgundy does not exist anywhere but Burgundy. We're a bunch of arrogant thieves as American and California winemakers, Oregon too, by stealing Europe's grapes, bringing them over here, planting them, making good wine, but then claiming that somehow we have terroir. Of course we don't. There's no genetic relationship between Pinot Noir and California, besides the changes that occur every minute in every Pinot Noir vineyard, in California. Have we developed our own Pinot Noir clones? Not really. I mean, we've got Swan, we've got Martinelli, we've got, these different clones, but you know what? They're just clones that were brought over from France. So, this idea that there's just that we are as legitimate as Burgundy, to me, is ridiculous. And I always try to put Burgundy on a pedestal as an American winemaker and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And basically, until further notice, American winemakers are just arrogant thieves. And we stole your grapes, we make good wine, and we say it's about our dirt. Maybe it is. I mean, dirt matters, climate matters, but at the same time, I want to make sure you know that I'm not making analogous Santa Barbara and the Côte d'Or, where Pinot Noir was basically invented and controlled European politics through the Valois Dukes and Duke Philip the Bold for almost 2 centuries. For a while, Burgundy was the only place in the world that grew Pinot Noir. So if you were the king of Sweden, you wanted Pinot Noir on your table, and everyone expected you to have Burgundy wine on European tables of royalty. If you pissed off the Valois Dukes, they would cut you off from Burgundy wine. So you would do everything you could to make sure the Valois Dukes loved your country so that you would never get cut off from your supply of Burgundy wine. All right. Do you think it makes much of a difference? A bottle is foiled, waxed, or left without? The only difference is how difficult it is for me to get to the wine. I hate wax. I hate wax. Will never wax another bottle in any property that I have an influence on. If you didn't know, the best way to open a wax bottle, whether it's the tough, awful wax that the Brewer Clifton boys used to put on their bottles, all the way to soft wax, just drive your corkscrew through the wax as if it wasn't there and just pop it out. So just pretend wax isn't there and you'll have a much better life. I know some people actually cut around the bulge on the top of the wax, so when they pull it out, it doesn't break in an odd thing. But, I'm not a sommelier. I just want to get to the liquid inside. To be honest, I think screw cap. I would not be upset if everyone in the world right now went to screw cap. Certainly, natural cork is likely the worst thing you could ever do to a bottle of wine during production. The idea that you could lose 2 to 3% of every wine you make by virtue of cork taint makes me think, if you made airplanes and 2 to 3% of them fell out of the sky, would you think that you're doing the right thing? So, I mean, screw cap, critical cork like Diem is to me the way to go. Natural cork, it's 2,000 years old, and the technology is I think is pathetic. Frizzante, yes indeed. No stems, no seeds, and we don't need Acapulco Gold is. I understand where you're going, Ian McKenzie, and I like it. Stems are green, yeah, you'll definitely get the herbaceousness and the bitterness. Some people say lindifying the stems, this crazy guy who makes wine for Sine Qua Non has this technique where he de-stems, takes the stems, lays them out in his on tarps in his parking lot in Ventura, and waits till the stems get nice and brown, and then throws the stems into the ferment. So now they're brown and lindified, so they won't give a green and herbaceous character. I still think it's ridiculous. Christy Marshall, love it. Stoked you are here. Yeah, foil. Do we need foil? No, I don't think so. You're seeing a lot of young winemakers, the young Turks now. It seems like all of them are foregoing foils. So, I mean, it's a waste. The foil never really gets used. I mean, how important is the foil over the cork? Well, I mean, I actually prefer to buy wines without foil because I can look at the quality of the cork. I can see if it's leaked. I can see if there's leakage. I can see if it's pushing. I think a foil, to a certain extent, is part of the opening of the present. It's part of the ritual. I've never seen any scientific information or any study that says that the foil has any impact on the quality or the aging of the wine. Might not be true, but I would think it is. And wax is just a pain in the butt. Yeah, if we go all screw cap or all no foil, I would be a total happy camper. Absolutely. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything over here on Facebook. Last call. If you guys have any last quick questions, again, feel free to put a couple questions up after we're finished. But cool. Awesome. And I appreciate all you folks coming out and making this yet another fun and successful version. We've got, okay, so got that. Natural cork. Yeah, gosh, natural cork is just such a pain in the butt. All right. Is it true that, okay, no, that was the chilling red wine question. Still loving the fact that Karen's out there at the Lincoln Memorial. Awesome. I think I've caught up. I talked about carbonic maceration. I talked about cellar temps. I've asked your questions. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I'm gonna finish my wine and maybe start watching a movie. and hanging out, and I hope you guys all had a good time. I will check for questions, so if something comes up to you, I'm always looking for subjects for the show. So if you want to wiggle your puppet strings and make Wes Hagen hop up and down and talk any way that you want, feel free. I'm always here. Remember, outside of Instagram and Facebook, I'm $150 an hour. Right here, I'm your bitch. So let's go. It's going to be loads of fun. All right. And then as I always close the show, make sure to, I'll add this one in, make sure to respect and push forward all ideas of flourishing, regardless of creed, color, religion, or no religion. And then make sure that we're still in the middle of a pandemic and a lot of people are still suffering. I think we're going to see a little bit of increase in suffering as a result of sort of a lessening of social distancing. So make sure to take care of yourself, take care of the people around you. Encourage folks that it's not just about them, but it's about folks who work in retirement homes, folks who work in hospitals, folks like my buddy Josh, who's out there as that thin blue line keeping us safe out there. So make sure it's not only about you; it's about the people with us that really are the most susceptible and vulnerable. And in a time where you might have read on my Facebook page that it seems that 2020's main theme is that vulnerable people and vulnerable populations, vulnerable cohorts, are now sort of being deemed as expendable in this culture. No. You may have read even before human beings became Homo habilis, back when we were Neanderthal. There is clear scientific evidence of hunter men who had their legs broken in a hunt that were kept in that tribe and taken care of by their tribe for more than 20 to 25 years before they died, after their injuries. So altruism and taking care of the vulnerable within our society is not even a human thing. It's a freaking Neanderthal thing. So I'm going to go ahead and go on the spot right now and say, if you're not making the most vulnerable people within our society comfortable and safe, you're not even human. Sorry. Go back to Neanderthal. I hope you had a great night, and I hope you're safe, and I hope the people around you are safe. Find someone in your neighborhood that needs some help. Find someone in your family that needs some help. Find some people in your community. Find some people in your friends, and make sure to just reach out and show some love. And whatever I can do to help, if you need any help, let me know too, because I'm in this with you. Great. Have an awesome time, guys. It was really fantastic. And Karen, thank you so much for being out there in DC and showing the world that this really matters. And obviously, the more we're out there, the more we're showing the world that we care about everyone and inclusiveness and the idea that we're all in this together, whether through a pandemic or whether through racial equality. I think we all need to have our voices heard. So thank you for showing your voice, and thank you, Karen, for doing that. So I hope all of you take good care. I hope all of you flourish until our next meeting. Oh, what are we doing on Wednesday? I'll just tell you, on Wednesday, we're doing Pinot Blanc and blind tasting technique. So I'm going to teach you guys how to taste blind and what I do, deduction versus pleasure. So are you taking a pleasure note? We're talking about a deductive tasting style. I'll take you through both of them. And then on Friday, I'm bringing in our Ballard Lane winemaker, John Crandall. So all of these great questions about Ballard Lane, we're bringing in our Ballard Lane winemaker, and we're going to do a Zoom on Friday, same time, 5 o'clock, and we're going to be talking all about these wonderful things. So really appreciate you guys being here. Kept it under an hour. I said it would be a half an hour. If you know me, that means probably double. So thanks again, and we'll get this up. And don't forget, if you didn't see Friday's show, I did post the whole darn thing because some of it got cut off on Facebook. It's up on the J. Wilkes Wine Santa Barbara Facebook page, as well as our YouTube pages. We need a little more love on our YouTube pages. I know you guys watch it on here, but everything is also put in and archived on YouTube. So you can check J. Wilkes Wines on YouTube or Miller Family Wine Company on YouTube, and follow us because we need some more followers. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys on Wednesday, 4:45 on Facebook, 5 o'clock right here on Instagram. Have a great day, guys. Thanks again.